So Pete, I don't want to embarrass you, but I understand that you are a pillar of the community. So I know I know what a treat it is to have you with us today. So I want to say thank you for reprising your presentation that you gave at the GRC in West Virginia. Yeah,
Yeah.
in West Virginia last year. And I found your little bio on the GRC page, and I really dig it. So I just wanted to read it real quick. So, PeteTridish has built studios, raised towers, drafted regulations, passed a law through Congress, been the plaintiff in a federal lawsuit against media consolidation, started nonprofits, and been arrested as a protester on various occasions. He has been a radio pirate, a policy advocate for community media, a carpenter, an environmental educator, a solar energy system installer, a squatter, a homeless shelter volunteer, and an activist in many social movements since the age of 16. He now runs International Media Action, a nonprofit radio engineering organization that helps to build community radio stations. So with that, thank you, Pete, for being with us to talk about solar-powered radio.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation to talk with you all about this project. And what I'll say is my actual first plan, because of like when I grew up, when I was in college, it was during the first Gulf War in roughly, 1990, 1991, 92. And during that time, it was actually my initial plan to to work in solar energy. So I studied it some in college. I went to a small liberal arts college with not a lot of science majors. So I can't say that I got like a real engineer's training there, but it was my original plan. The problem was that, you know, about towards the end of my time in college, we won that Gulf War. We took all the oil. Nobody cared about solar for the next like 25 years. I wasn't really able to work in it. So if I did want to work in it, I would have had to move to New Mexico, where there was like some of the only remnants of the solar industry still operating. So instead, I got into radio and got involved in the low power FM movement, the pirate radio movement, from where which is where I know you all from. So, but I got asked to do a project that was really interesting about 3 years ago, working for KCAW Raven Radio in Sitka, Alaska, and it's a very cool station. It was started by Rich and Susie McClear back in the mid '80s, and it's something that we're not very used to in the lower 48. In Alaska, the distinction between public radio and community radio is not as stark as it is here. There's a much smaller population there, and people can't split hairs too much. And there wouldn't really be enough volunteers to like run full-scale community radios in a lot of towns. Some of the places have 75 people, 500 people, 8,000 people. So people are a little bit more ecumenical, and also the public radio people are less snobby, I'd have to say, than they are down here. So KCAW is a kind of an interesting place. They do run All Things Considered and some public radio programming, but they also have 40 volunteers that just come in and do shifts, everything from bluegrass to indigenous music to Latin music, and so it'd be something that you'd be fairly familiar with. So that station, they operate out of Sitka, Alaska, which is I think it's the fourth or fifth largest city in the state, with a thriving population of 9,000 people. They have outlying translators in a lot of small indigenous and fishing communities uh, spread out over about 300 miles of the archipelago in Southeast Alaska. That basically most of these towns have no roads. They just have like the only way to get there is by a boat or a seaplane or an airplane. Um, a lot of them have no cell service. Some of them have no grid, particularly, and everything just runs off of generators. Uh, Most of them have like maybe one store, or maybe they have no stores. So in that particular area, and up until very recently, a lot of them had almost nothing in the way of internet. Even as recently as 4 years ago, when I first got there, there was really there was only one satellite internet provider, which was HughesNet, which was very, very unreliable and very stingy with its bandwidth. Um, so anyway, they had a network of repeaters that was built in the 80s and had been largely untouched since then. It was still a lot of the original Crown transmitters from back then that were still running. And uh, the new station manager at that time, Becky Myers, uh, quickly found out that half of her job was receiving calls from angry listeners that are like, the station's off the air again. I don't know what's wrong with it, and trying to troubleshoot with them, over the phone. Um, and it's pretty expensive to get out to these towns. You have to charter a seaplane generally, and not having hardware stores there, it's also pretty difficult to fix problems. So anyway, she said that she was starting a project to raise money to revamp all of the stations. And one of the first things that we realized, well, she also wanted to go up from 10 watts, which is their current power, to 250 watts, which is the allowable maximum for translator stations. And we very quickly realized that the energy in these towns is very scarce and hard to get. The first town we worked in was Port Alexander, and they have no grid. All they have is they have a generator that runs at the school sometimes. But for people's own houses, they just use their own generators in their house. So we realized that we were going to have to build our own power source if we were going to be able to operate the station. Beforehand, they had let us use some of the some power from the battery bank in City Hall, but that was just about failing, and we were going to have to like come up with something ourselves. So I took it as an opportunity to like sort of refamiliarize myself with the stuff that I studied, 30 years ago. And I never stopped tinkering with solar. I've done it on my house, and I've helped friends with it. And I have a project in Puerto Rico in the island of Vieques where me and a couple friends go every February for a couple of weeks, and we just install solar panels on the houses of some of the people that were, that are there. A lot of them were involved in the movement to move to get the Navy to leave Vieques in the late 2000, in around 2000 or so. So we decided that we would expand the scope of the project to adding solar and wind and whatever energy was appropriate in storage to these stations, and also to add internet connectivity, more modern transmitters, and more capacity for remote control, remote monitoring, and just all the things that you can do. The old transmitters, I'm very impressed. I mean, some of them are even still now operating. Crystal controlled, they're 40 years old and still going, but they were becoming more and more flaky. And a lot of the antennas also have been up on the towers for 40 years and have just endured the 130-mile-an-hour winds that are common in that part of Alaska. Just also because most people aren't familiar with the climate there, that part of Alaska, Southeast Alaska, the climate is what you might think of. It's not what you think of when you think of like Eskimos and dog sleds and all that sort of thing, things people think about Alaska. It's more like a very extreme version of Seattle. It's like it rains, I think, 2 out of 3 days throughout the year. It's not that cold because it's all an archipelago in the ocean. And the ocean doesn't freeze down to there. So it's often chilly, but it doesn't freeze very much. But the winds can get up to hurricane force, pretty regularly during the winter. And what we would think of as a hurricane, they would think of as like a Thursday, in around there. So anyway, that was the challenge that we had, and Becky successfully raised a bunch of funding from a couple of local foundations. Also applied to CPB for money for the next generation warning systems to help do it. We did the first project just out of the station's operating budget, just to like do sort of a proof of concept, so that we could show the funders that we were serious about doing this conversion. And so that was it. And now I'm going to bring up something that if you take nothing else from this talk, this is the most important thing I can tell you, which is that one thing that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act, Joe Biden's giant spending package on solar and stuff, is it's one of the big reasons that probably a lot of your stations have not gone solar, even when you've seen other things go solar, which is the way that the United States government has tried to push the solar transition up until recently has mostly been through tax credits. So if you're a homeowner and you buy a solar system, you can take it off on your taxes and pay less taxes that year. And so it's a good deal. It's a working thing. The problem, though, is that for people in the nonprofit sector, for organizations, there was no comparable benefit. And so even as like giant corporations, like say Johnson and Johnson or Google or whatever, were installing solar panels on their roofs and taking money off their taxes to do it, Pacifica was not able to do that because Pacifica doesn't pay taxes in the first place. So there was no financial benefit. One of the things that is like just currently getting worked out right now is they added a benefit to the Inflation Reduction Act, where now nonprofits that spend money on solar energy, alternative energy, and storage, they can spend the money on getting it installed. They can document their expenses on it, and they can send it in with their 990, and the IRS will send them a check for like between 50 and 70% of the cost of the installation. So that's going to be a really big thing for nonprofits that are hoping to go solar. Is that you still have to like find the money to do it somehow, and pay smart accountants to figure out how to like dot all the I's and cross all the T's and whatever. But if you put money into solar now, you'll get it back. And instead of like a project that would cost you $100,000 or something like that to do a big installation, you could easily get 50 or 70% of that back from the IRS at the end of the year. So that's gonna hopefully be a big game changer. That's something that your stations can really use to be able to like think about the cost of doing it, being 50 to 70% less than you would have. We're going to apply for that money for the first time this year. There are still some things that I don't understand about it. Like I'm not quite sure what expenses the IRS considers reimbursable and so on. And we're still like trying to like find tax advice and accountants and whatever that that understands it well enough to to advise us as we're like spending on the projects. Um, so yeah, so we did our first one 2 years ago in Port Alexander. And that has about, it's not huge, it's a small repeater. Remember, it only uses about 300 watts at a time. So we did a 2 kilowatt installation of solar. I think, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 5 panels. It was a small wind machine that its job, remember, we were also taking this out of their operating budget. It was before we had any real money to work with. And 20 kilowatt hours of storage, so enough to run the station for about 3 or 4 days, uh, without support. It also does get intermittently charged up by the town's generator when it's running, and then when the generator is not running, we send some extra electricity back into the town battery bank, which allows them to keep their internet going in city hall for a little bit longer. So it's a nice relationship there between the two systems. Yeah, and so we're planning on doing something basically similar in all 7 of them. We're doing 2 more this year, one in Angoon, which is a town of about 500 people, and another in Teneke Springs. And they're all going to be sort of they're all a little different depending on the resource that's available. One trouble with wind, there's lots of wind there, but disorganized wind is not very helpful. It's really, wind does best when it's nice and high above the treetops. And so some of our sites are conducive to wind and others are not. Also, it's pretty easy to make a windmill that makes electricity. It's pretty difficult to make a windmill that can withstand hurricane force winds without tearing itself apart. And so we're still like we're kind of testing out different companies and like looking for recommendations about it. The first one that we installed, it worked okay for a while, but like we had a trouble with its monitoring. And so I'm actually going back this summer to visit that one to figure out. So I actually have no idea how well it's working because because the monitoring failed and it's far away. So let's see. Well, why don't I leave it there and why don't we move to like questions and discussion? I can share. I'll say I'll put a link in the notes. I wrote an article for Radio World magazine about it that has some diagrams and some pictures of the different systems, and I'm totally I am kind of moving more towards this as a specialty in the engineering that I do, like working on remote sites and moving towards incorporating energy storage at tower sites and stuff. So, well, leave it there. I'll look for this link and start. We can start with questions and discussion.
Anyone have any questions so far? I have a real basic one. Like you said, it takes about 4 days to charge, or it will last for 4 days. The station that you're working on now, the charge.
It has enough storage that if it had no energy whatsoever coming into it, like if the generator was off and the solar panels weren't working and the wind power wasn't working, as long as it started with a full charge, it could run for 4 days with nothing. And so it's that it's good for a a scenario which is common there, that that you just don't have power available for a good while. Also, of course,
it's really cloudy or
yeah.
okay.
With solar energy, it's always a challenge because and also just to back up, the solar industry for the past like 15, 20 years, it's been really booming. But what has been booming is just solar and not storage. So what people do is they add solar panels to their roof, the power uh turns their meter backwards and like goes to the power company, but they don't have any batteries. So people who in the last 20 years put up their panels on their roof, a lot of them don't have any battery power. So if the grid goes down, they go down with everyone else. And their solar panels don't do anyone any good.
Right.
And uh, so the reason that's been is because batteries are crazy expensive. And the price of solar has gone down very quickly in the past 20, 30 years. When I was first working in it in the 90s, uh, solar panels could be like, $5, $6 a watt to purchase them. Currently, the price of them is like 50 cents, 30 cents. The used panels that I bought to go to Blaikie were 9 cents a watt. Um, so it's to get a used panel now, it's 100th of the price that it was in 1995.
Oh, wow.
Batteries, on the other hand, uh, they have not come down as quickly. In maybe more like the last 10 years, we're starting to see like a real change there with the advent of lithium ion batteries and LiFePO batteries. But they have not fallen in price nearly as fast as solar. So what most people did was they stayed on grid, but they added solar. And now it's becoming more possible to also add your batteries too.
How
Uh,
much is a battery?
well, the ones that we bought for this, um, they are 5 kilowatt hours, and they were about $1,400 a piece. And so
And you would get a couple? You would
we
get,
bought four of them. So
okay.
a total of 20 kilowatt hours of storage is what we got. And so we paid about $6,000 for that. Which is not cheap, but it's not, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Um, and particularly with like these, if we get to the point when we get to the point where the government is paying 50 or 70% of it, then it's pretty great. It's like it's doable. So,
Yeah. So your approach is not just solar. It sounds like you have kind of a multifaceted approach. You've got solar, wind, battery, and the town generator all as options.
right. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Anyone have any thoughts?
At KIDE in Hoopa, we were the first solar power department in the tribal operations, and this was back in, I want to say, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And we're the first solar powered radio station in California. And the unit that we used was a Sunny Boy, and that's as for the generator. And so
Mhm.
what it would do, it would take the solar power and convert it into electricity and slow down our meter as long as the sun was up. Then as it was what do you call it? Then it would transition back to the grid as the sun went down.
Yeah.
And then we also have a backup generator that actually our neighboring department owns this huge generator because it's the casino. And so we tied into that. So when the grid is down, that generator gives the station powers too.
Oh, that's great.
When you guys are talking about these going back and forth between generator and solar or whatever it is that a manual transition or is that just something that happens automatic?
It's
Ours was a Okay, ours was a manual at first, but then we got tired of coming in there and pushing that lever down. So we purchased another, what, probably about $1,200 or something like that for the electric company to come in and put in an automatic switch for us.
Yeah, these days, like the inverters that you can buy, uh, what one thing they've done is they've simplified a lot of this quite a bit and put more functions into a single box. So your typical solar power system, it would include the solar panels and then a charge controller. And the charge controller just makes sure that the power coming in from the solar panels is not too much for the batteries. So you go from the solar panels to the charge controller, then to the batteries, and then from the batteries into an inverter that converts it from DC battery power into AC power, which is what everyone uses for everything. That's what comes out of the wall. DC is more what people use mostly in cars or, in like small electronics, phones, whatever. So, so what modern inverters are starting to do is they include the charge controller and they include an automatic an inverter for the DC to AC, and they also include an automatic transfer switch. And they can accept power either from the grid or from the solar panels or from the battery. And so it's like all internal. There are some issues with that. Like there are some cheap ones. The first one I did was I used a kind of cheap one. It was about $700. And I was amazed, like each of these components would have been twice that 10 years ago. I was like, how did they do that? And then after I installed it, I learned how they did it. They made it kind of inefficient. Like it wastes about 70 watts just like operating, which is, kind of a lot. And also the problem that I discovered with it was that it didn't reliably report itself out to its like, applications and whatever. So the next generation of them that I'm building, I'm using a more expensive system. That first system was an EG4. Now I'm going to use a Victron, which is more like around $3,000 and just has some is like higher up the totem pole in terms of like its uh you know just its function, its quality, and everything like that. So
So this is kind of a new technology. You're getting it as it's happening, getting on the ground floor kind of a deal.
These things are changing very quickly. The prices are changing. There's a big shortage of people to install this sort of stuff because just people aren't really trained up very well in this country. And also, not very many young people want to do this. Everyone wants to be a TikTok star or whatever, But so I think yeah, for instance, like batteries. When I said the price of batteries, I like kind of like oversimplified. When I bought those batteries, for the first project about 2.5 years ago, they were $1,500 each. The ones that I'm buying this year are $1,200 for the same battery. So the prices are moving quickly and changing quickly. A lot of it has to do with the fact that, unlike the United States, China, Germany, a number of other countries have like real industrial policy. And they really put a lot of resources and government money and time and effort into helping like push their solar industry forward. And that's why most of the batteries in the world now are made in China. Most of the solar panels in the world are made in China. They figured out, even though it was invented in the United States, they figured out how to do it better there. And they, so it's going to be a lot of catching up for the United States to make solar panels here again.
Interesting.
But as a result, like if you look at the pictures, like there are whole hillsides in China that are covered with solar panels, and incredibly cheap and incredibly productive.
Oh, that's cool. So when you do your organization now, when you go to help build a radio station, is that something that you push for the solar version, or you just kind of see what they need?
I mean, I definitely suggest it. Uh, I think it's, some of them don't need it. It depends on the situation. There are uh, some of the towns in Alaska where we're working, they do have more reliable electricity. And so we'll probably put a little bit of solar just so that like they can weather a storm, but we won't spend as much money there if it's reasonable. Now, another thing I'll mention about the towns, there, like for example, Elfin Cove, that's one of the places where we're doing an installation. I think the year after next. And that one, I was talking to people about, they do have a utility, and I was talking to people about their electric bill. It's 95 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity in Elfin Cove. By comparison, in Philadelphia, it's 12 cents a kilowatt hour. That's about the national average.
Wow.
So they pay like whatever that is, 7, 8 times more for electricity than we do. So that's a place where, even if you make a solar system, uh, even if it only contributes like, I don't know, like 40% of the power that the thing uses, that's a very big savings and starts to pay itself back quickly when you're actually paying an electric bill like that.
Yeah, they're probably really grateful for that.
Yeah.
Are you out there right now?
No, I'm based in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
So what I did was I agreed to spend the last two and the next 2 summers in Alaska. So I go in July and August. Um, and truthfully, it's hard to work very much there in other parts of the year. It is so rainy and so windy.
Mm.
But a lot of people go during that time, first of all, for the fishing industry is very big. So even though the populations of some of these towns are very small, they triple or quadruple or whatever, during the summer months. And and also one of the goals of the station manager was not only to be able to hear the radio station in the town, but for the people in the commercial fishing fleet to be able to hear the station over the
Oh.
water, which has not been possible up until now with their 10-watt stations. But we expect that they're going to get a lot better coverage so that people can hear it over the water.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Can they help then too, then with if there's emergencies or weather stuff, or do the boats have their own thing?
Weather is huge. It's like a very big part of their programming. And they actually have like a kind of a hazing thing that they do. Whenever like a public radio person comes to visit, they ask them to read the weather report, um, which includes the tides and the choppy seas and everything like that. And it's for 7 communities, and they have to do it in like a minute and a half to fit in the segment. And even all these like really experienced NPR people are like, "Oh my God, stormy seas over Yakutat," blah, 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 get it all out. But yeah, for a very long time, it was people's like main access to that. Finally, in the past like 2 or 3 years, um, there started to be alternatives for or not alternatives, an alternative for internet there, which is Elon Musk's
Mm,
what's Starlink. And
mm.
uh, you know, let's not even talk about Elon Musk, uh but his Starlink satellites, he has managed to establish a pretty amazing monopoly with a pretty amazing product. I mean, those things work very well and are making, just making the internet way better in places like Alaska that doesn't have any real competition. I'll tell you a funny story. The first project I did in Alaska was in Yakutat, which is a town of about 900 people. And this was 2015, and they told me that getting internet in town was just very expensive. You had to pay about $1,000 for a big dish, and you would get it from HughesNet. And HughesNet had this like weird thing where you paid and you got a certain number of gigabytes, but even if you used it, you couldn't go over what was allotted to you. What would happen instead is your internet would just shut off after that until the next week. So like every 7 days you could use like 2 gigabytes and that was it. And what they told me was like there was the computers, there were computers in City Hall that they used for city business. And somehow like someone wasn't supervising the building right. And some teenagers got in and they started watching YouTube videos. And like all of a sudden the city's internet was shut down for the next like 6 days.
Oh my God.
Because in like 2 hours of watching YouTube, they had used all of their bandwidth that they could have.
Oh my God.
And they couldn't buy any more. They were just out of luck. And so that's kind of like the internet that most people in Alaska in these outlying communities have been used to up until basically till last year when Starlink started rolling out its competing service.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah, YouTube will suck it out of you, man.
Yeah. Yeah, for real. So other questions about the installations and
Well, this was really interesting and exciting to hear about. I appreciate you coming, Pete. This was great.
I'm gonna like add one more link to
Yeah.
a thing called Clean E Group. I don't know them too well, but I called them about this. They're the ones that know about the new incentives for nonprofits.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called direct pay. And it's almost like I feel like I'm like selling vacuum cleaners or something like that because it's so like fantastic. Like, but
Cleanupgroup.org.
And I'll kind of believe it when I see the check actually come from the IRS to like pay back for the solar panels and whatever. But that's the guide.
Okay.
And there are different incentives. Like it's 50% for your basic nonprofit, and then it's like another 10% if it's like a native tribe or like a disadvantaged area. I don't know. It's like, it's like a book full of rules and all that sort of thing.
So this is the answer to the, you can't get a tax incentive, but you can go this route and get assistance.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. That's awesome.
And can I make a suggestion? I can't, I don't know, I'm on a tablet and I'm not sure, Zoom, I can't operate like on a laptop. Could you put the chat and all these links in an email and send them to us I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, why don't I let's see. I'll put him on the YouTube page that this shows up on, and then when I announce that the video is ready for viewing, I'll put it on that email also.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you bet.
That's great. Yeah. Well, and I'm happy to talk to anyone individually. I'm really excited to take what I've learned from these ones and work with other community radio stations that want to start the path towards towards going solar with it. So
Yeah, it's exciting. And it's exciting to hear people like Joan and Joseph that you guys are already using it and that it's happening. That's really great. So wow, I wish you luck in your next Alaska adventure. That must be kind of a trip on its own, just being out there and
Oh, it's fantastic. It's like, I live in Philadelphia in the middle of a city, and to be able to like go to Alaska for the hottest months here and go there where it never goes above 70 degrees all summer.
yeah,
I, you know, it wouldn't be for everybody. It's like it's nice getting away from the internet for a while,
right.
and it's nice getting away it's nice not being able to go to the store, having to like plan out, everything. And there's definitely like uh I what I would say about it is it reminds you of how interconnected and interdependent we all are. Um and I think that it's
Someone got a radio going or a phone?
yeah. Um
I guess my phone.
Oh, okay.
um
Sorry.
No worries.
and it also like reminds you of what a kind of a fantasy it is when people think about like going off grid, because these people that I'm working with there are as close to off grid as you could imagine in the United States, but they're not off the grid at all. They are incredibly dependent in so many ways on shipments of groceries, on shipments of diesel fuel. But it's more on the surface there, and you see just like when you're like just a couple more miles away from industrial society, you actually see like how deeply dependent we all are on it, and
Mm.
definitely like sort of changes your mind about makes you appreciate all the convenient things that we have like more.
Yeah, like making you realize how vulnerable we can be as human beings, that we're all one step away from tough times.
The,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tax credit is really fascinating for me because now I don't know whether this is possible, but if you get the stuff donated and then you get a tax credit, you're like getting double money. Is that possible?
Well, I don't think so. I think the if you get the stuff donated, then it'll just reduce the cost of your project. But what I do believe is that the tax credit not only pays for the equipment, it also pays for the installation, because like most people can't install their own solar panels and everything. So like they're assuming that like you're not like having volunteers doing it, you're paying someone to like put them up on your roof. So even if you have the donated equipment, the tax credit can be used for the contractors, it can be used for like all the other associated parts of it. There's also a lot of electrical equipment that's required for it. So the panels are just like the first thing you pay for, but then, the inverters and all the like the changes to your circuit breaker panel and like all that, there's a lot to it. One other thing that I think is going to drive the solar transition too is it's become common practice among solar installers. They don't want to screw around with like installing solar panels on your 10-year-old roof, because they don't want you to blame them when their roof leaks. So it's also become pretty standard to just like include in the cost of the project a new roof. And so if you think about that, like if you know people that have like a bad roof on their house, they actually might pay less to put a new roof with solar on than they would have just paid for a roof if it weren't for the subsidies. So that's, you know,
That's interesting.
something to consider. I just made that recommendation to the Sanctuary for Independent Media. They have a very big old church that they run out of.
Those
And the
guys
group,
are in New York.
yeah, yeah, in upstate New York. And I think if they could get their roof fixed as part of a solar project, that might actually be worth the cost of the project, you know.
Oh, very cool.
So,
And any other thoughts?
Is there
well,
any,
Or do you have more thoughts, Pete?
well, I guess I would just say
Mhm.
it's hard for the anarchist in me to admit it, but it is really different, like under a Democratic administration than under a Republican administration. Um, as disappointing as the Democrats are, like the Inflation Reduction Act is really an example of like just a very different way of, like none of this would be happening under a Republican administration. So it's nice to have different problems. Like we have better problems now.
is there any way of just using the DC power as opposed to going through all the AC to DC and DC to AC and all that sort of thing?
It is possible. And we may choose to do that with certain aspects of it. There are certain conversion inefficiencies going between DC and AC, mostly in terms of like the transmitters, they generally run on AC. Um, you can buy them that run on DC, but they're more expensive and they're more of a specialty item. Um, and yeah, we do use DC for some of the control systems um, that we use, but it's not really very much. We probably one thing about this is the lithium ion batteries. They're so much better than lead acid batteries, but they do have one weakness, which is that they can't receive charge if the temperature in the room they're stored in goes below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And so one thing that we have to do is we have a thermostat in the room and a little heater that comes on anytime that it's less than 32 degrees out, which fortunately is not that much, but it is kind of a waste of some of our power. And that's something that I might do with a DC heater, because it might save a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you're always trying, yeah, new things as you go along. Yeah.
Um,
Final call for thoughts.
I'm surprised I haven't heard anything from Tom because he spent so much time doing telecom in Alaska.
Yeah, that's the truth. Although my experience started way back there in the early 70s on mountaintops, some of the first generation solar equipment at that time. But what I really wanted to bring up is that the energy power companies are starting to get organized and uh, they're trying to well, here in Washington State, for instance, if you have solar on your house, like the one I'm in at the moment, they've ended the payback for any power that might go into the local power company system. So that's gone away. The other things that are happening that I'm aware of is the oil companies are starting to build charging stations across the country. So there's, and in California, the solar industry I'm aware of is starting to suffer. And one of the factors is a nuke plant that was due to be decommissioned, I believe, in about a year. They just extended its life expectancy for what, at least another 5 years, I think.
Mhm.
So those are the kind of things that, we're going to have to get organized to respond to.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's, the transition that we're going through is, what's good is finally the corporations are interested in it, and what's bad is the corporations are interested in it, and they're like finding all the ways that they can to squeeze the money out of it, and really make consumers no better off than they were before. So, it's and there are I do also have to say the solar industry has an embarrassing history full of shysters. Um,
Mm.
because it's like sort of the same sales pitch as the like people that sell perpetual motion machines, free energy from the air. And but it's actually a little bit true, but the details are always not like really, not really all there, there's the so it's it's definitely a challenge. And when I talk to my friends that are considering going solar, I counsel them to like not get swept up in the positiveness of it, but like look carefully. Um
Mm.
and deal with people that um that can be good and transparent in the way that they're doing business. So
I mean, like, yeah, be careful about who you choose to help you out, or
yeah,
what organization. Okay.
yeah, it's there's a lot of the tricks have to do with the financing.
Mhm.
Um, the big obstacle to uptaking of solar is that it is a big upfront investment. And so then you're involving banks. And whatever you're involving banks, you're involving people who make their living by skimming off of other people's money, right? That's what
Mhm.
banks are. And and so they find ways of making it look free to you, but where most of the benefit goes to them.
So
Um, and
if
the
you
risk.
buy a solar panel, eventually once you pay it off, it's yours though, right? Like, or is there still ways for them to get money from you?
Well, a lot of the schemes that are going around now, it's like they pay the upfront cost, but then they keep whatever money goes back to the utility, and they charge you like less than you would have paid for your electric bill, um, for the solar panels that are on your roof, but they still own them. So they're basically like they pay for the
Oh,
system, so it's like no money down, but they're basically leasing
oh,
the panels to you, and you know,
yeah.
like
So they're not yours.
they're not yours. Yeah,
Mm.
Um, and uh and also like there are questions, there are definitely like a lot of companies being started now, and like, are they going to be around in 10 years when your roof springs a leak
Mm.
to fix it, or is that going to be your problem? So
Right.
those are
The
those are good questions to ask of anyone.
the ones that you put on the radio stations, do those panels belong to them, or they belong to someone else?
No, because they're paying for them themselves. I mean,
They bought them,
money out of
right?
their
Yeah.
pocket. So
Okay.
the federal ones, they'll belong to you because you bought them. You're just getting reimbursed for part of it.
Okay.
Um, and the radio stations, they own those solar panels. So those are theirs to keep. One nice
So far
thing,
that still is an option.
solar panels, they do last a very long time. They're generally warranted for 25 years. And they continue to produce power even after that. Although by that time you might want to replace them because they degrade. One like basic thing to know about solar panels, they lose like about 1% per year. And it's mostly
Oh.
because the glass fogs up and they get kind of dirty and whatever. Um,
Mm.
and you can
Hmm.
clean them, but the glass itself like gets like a little fogged up and stuff. And so so after 10 years, if you bought a 100-watt solar panel, you would expect it to put out about 90 watts.
Huh. That's interesting.
And that's pretty good, compared to a lot of things like, uh, you think about a computer, and if you still have the computer 10 years from now that you bought this year, like you're very lucky, but it probably basically like barely works, right? So a solar panel that can work for 25 years, it's a lot better than we've come to expect from the consumer electronics industry, which has a lot of planned obsolescence, you know. So solar panels, they'll last you longer than your refrigerator, your dishwasher, like your computer, but they don't necessarily last forever. And there's also advances that happen in solar panels that, you know, for instance, about 4 or 5 years ago, they started coming out with these bifacial solar panels where instead of having backing material, the solar panel is on both sides. And so um, it's like 400 watts from one side, but maybe another like 100 watts from the back. So if you happen to establish to put them up on like a white roof or a reflective roof, you can get 500 watts out of a 400-watt panel with these new panels. So
Oh, wow.
that's something that is, you know, that's coming. Or that's an innovation where you might want to upgrade at some point.
Do you think it's
So
possible there will be, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
So the power from the back, is it from the light going through the panel and then coming back from the light roof?
No, it's actually from uh like the light might hit the if you had a white roof and the light hits the roof like during different parts of the day. Like for example, like the solar panels are oriented south, but like the morning light, you know, it'll hit the panels, but it'll also hit the roof underneath and it'll bounce up and it'll light up the back of the panel.
I see.
So it makes them a little less directional than they used to. You know, there are also some other things that have changed in solar. Like it used to be that solar panels were so expensive that people spent a lot of money and time and effort on making solar trackers that would point the panels at the sun all day. You know, so you would watch a field of solar panels and it would like turn
Mhm.
over the course of the day. Now almost no one does that because it's cheaper to just put up twice as many panels than to like have all that mechanism and motion, you know, and all that sort of thing.
And when you said that it depreciates like 1% a year, is that something that can be upgraded or innovated, or is that just going to be the way it is for those?
That it'll just be the way it is for that. It'll be yeah, eventually they'll just be replaced.
Okay.
I mean, that's going to be another big question is like how all this stuff's going to get recycled and like reused. And, you know, the solar industry, like everyone else, should really be thinking about, I mean, really, like at this point in history, companies should be thinking of themselves as responsible for the product from from when they make it to when you buy it to when you have to throw it out, you know, and you know, they should be making products that are easy to recycle, to take apart, get back the valuable parts, you know, melt down the aluminum again and like make new racks out of it and all that sort of thing, reuse the glass. So that's going to be a big challenge, you know, because, you know, the early solar panels weren't necessarily designed for that. Um, but they can be.
Yeah, there's a lot more subtleties about solar that I didn't realize. I appreciate you sharing those things.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, it's pretty great moment because there's a lot of innovation, a lot of very smart people working on it. I've been it's funny, like, you know, my original knowledge of it was mostly from the things that were developed in the 70s and then taught in college in the 90s. And to see how much has changed just over the course of my lifetime with it is like really impressive. Like once people really set their minds to it, like a lot of problems that were big problems when I was studying it in school, they've been solved.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's
So,
exciting. Wow. Well, it's been a pleasure to hear your story and to hear about your work, Pete. I appreciate you coming a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm so glad to be invited and, you know, look forward to hearing from any of you in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, and you let us know if there's any updates.
Okay,
And,
that sounds good.
Okay, and thank you everyone for visiting today. This was great to have you. And I will remember to put those links in an email for everybody so we can all stay up to date. And
Appreciate that.
well, yeah, thank you, Pete, and thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Everyone stay
Thank you.
safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.